Proverbs 13:24 reads, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." Whereas if you study position statements from the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the Canadian Pediatric Association, the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, the Australian Medical Association, the World Health Organization, or UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, you'll find something like this, which comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics and reads, "The American Academy of Pediatrics believes that corporal punishment, including spanking, hitting, and other forms of physical or emotional punishment, is not effective and can cause harm. The AAP recommends that parents and caregivers use healthy forms of discipline, such as positive reinforcement of appropriate behaviors, setting limits, redirecting, setting a good example. Corporal punishment has been associated with increased aggression, antisocial behavior, and mental health problems in children. It is important for parents and caregivers to provide a safe, nurturing, and supportive environment for children to thrive." If you're a believer and you trust this Iron Age poetry over the word of pretty much every important scientist in the world on this matter, then I'm not likely going to change your mind this morning. But if you're a parent, I hope you understand that you owe it to your kids to make them feel safe and free from violence. If you're the former child of this kind of abuse, I hope you understand that it's not your fault if you find family relationships stressful and maybe even infuriating, but it is your responsibility to heal and break the cycle. And finally, if you think you can give me any good goddamn reason to reconsider my stance on hitting kids, well, give us a call this instant, because the show is coming right now. All right, well, welcome everyone. Today is February 18th, 2024. I am your host, Christy Powell, and joining me today is Jamie the Blind Limey.
Hello.
Hey, so how about you, Jamie? Did your parents spare the rod on you?
Well, my dad did not spare the rod. He didn't hit me, but listening to Rod Stewart as an 8-year-old is pretty cringe. So I don't know whether that counts.
Boo. Okay. Yeah. All right. So you were a little bit spoiled in some different ways.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But to be a little more serious, my parents, I can maybe remember one instance that they ever lost their rag enough to lay a hand on any of us. They admitted it was out of frustration later. They never did it again. Mm-hmm. It was never taught to us that that was the right way to go about things, solving your problems with violence. So I'm a pretty chill dude these days, and I feel that was the right way to go about raising us. Thanks, Mum and Dad. You're pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that my parents did their best in a certain way, but they were operating from these flawed reasonings. I remember specifically my stepdad telling me, "I am doing this because I love you," specifically quoting, "The Bible says that I would hate you if I wasn't hitting you right now." And, you know, I can appreciate how people get there. I understand it's in our culture, but it's just not what the science says. So, Jamie, as we're getting ready for calls today, are there any other theist attacks on science that you'd like to go to war with today?
There's a few. I mean, I like a bit of science myself, and the inconsistencies between the Bible and what we know of through scientific endeavor puzzle me greatly, because on the one hand you have a book, a 1500-year-old at its newest set of ancient texts and historical fiction versus all of the masses of evidence around which we build our entire world and that enable us to do things like host a show on the internet and not die from horrible diseases. So if you've got any justification as to why the Genesis story is the way it is, if you want to talk about Noah's flood, try and justify if that actually happened and how, or the firmament and flat earth and all that kind of stuff, I'd be fascinated to hear your explanations. I will likely not change my mind, I will be honest with you, but I'm always fascinated as how people try and square that circle.
Sure. No, I hear it. On my end, I'd love to talk about the secular moral landscape for family and sexual relationships, about what psychedelics can and can't teach us about consciousness and or God, and of course, what psychology can help us unlearn from the Bible. Because this is Talk Heathen, a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. Talk Heathen is a live call-in show, and we have open lines. So get your calls in at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. But first, it is time for our Talk Heathen to Me segment, where we get into the questions of the week. Last week, we asked you, why are people really leaving the church? Here are our top 3 answers. I apologize. I'm not even going to try with this screen name, but I will say that our number 3 answer asks, why are people really leaving the church? Because it's more comfortable to sleep at home.
Yeah. Those pews are very hard.
Yeah, they can be. Creative writer 3887 says, people are really leaving the church because they found out, to their horror, that drag queens aren't the real threat to women and children.
Well, I have family who grew up in the Catholic Church, and they've got stories that I don't like to think of.
Yeah, well, let's not tell them about anything that Reagan did back in the day. We'll move on.
Yeah.
Because our number 1 favorite answer from this past week came from Rational Pair 1816. Why do people really leave religion? Because of a bunch of assholes on YouTube talking people out of their unfounded beliefs. I can't help but resemble that remark a little bit.
Oh, I revel in it. Call me the names you wish. Hate me, resent me, but you can't refute me.
I feed on your booze.
No, but we do actually want to have some nice conversations too. So we're not just going to come out the gates swinging. If you want to have an honest conversation with us, we're all about that.
That's fair. We are totally here for that, and we will read all of our mean tweets and comments if we get around to it. But the prompt for next week's question really is, what's really going on in purgatory? Enter your best answer below the video in the comments. Next week, we will reveal the top 3 answers. But Jamie, what do you think? What's really going on in purgatory?
I think they're all in purgatory searching for the billions of unbaptized baby souls that the Pope accidentally retconned out of existence when he closed limbo.
Yeah.
What do you mean the patch broke my save file? Can't you roll it back? Nope, sorry, they're gone. Start a new one.
Yeah, too many years of reading comic books have just absolutely ruined me for biblical lore. What can I say? Yeah, well, so we have a couple of calls on the line. We've got plenty more openings. We'd love to hear your hot, spicy takes or just your good, kind, reasonable conversation, please, about some of these issues. Before we jump on the lines, I want to make sure to thank all of the hardworking people that help to make this show run. I'd love to show you our crew cam and thank the video, the audio people, the moderators, the notes, the stamps, the call screeners. Let's see all those beautiful faces. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and hit that first call and talk to Kyle in Oregon, who is coming to us from the Talk Heathen TikTok. Kyle, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. Just want to have a nice, calm philosophical discussion about like an existence of a God. I don't necessarily believe in an Abrahamic God, but there's still a lot of things we don't really understand, and how science is almost kind of limited because of our technology and our math at the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that something's not there. So just curious about your thoughts, and, what I can bring to the discussion.
Yeah, sure. Well, there are so many things about the universe that we don't understand. I'm eager to learn more and more of them every day. And as I do, I recognize that I will only ever gather a tiny, tiny sliver of all the possible knowledge. I'm curious, Kyle, what is it that you believe and why? Why do you believe what it is that you believe? There's your two-part question. Hit me.
Yeah, that's it's a complex question. I don't exactly fit in the mold. Like, I'm not Christian. I was raised Christian. I was atheist for a long period of time, and then I just got curious in more esoteric, older religions, and just started realizing that a lot of the Abrahamic have blown a lot of things out of proportion, and really led astray, and especially with more of the manipulative side of man and how they change the ideals from whatever past, things that happen, old religions, and they kind of morphed it into fit their ideals.
Sure. Well, so I'm hearing that there are a lot of things that you don't know, and I'm hearing that there are a lot of religions, or at least religious beliefs, that you don't believe in. What is it that you do believe in, and why do you believe it?
Yeah, I think I would consider myself agnostic atheist, so I don't have like the true knowledge through experience, but I do believe in some kind of God. More of a esoteric kind, so he would be completely wouldn't care necessarily if we do acts of good and evil. If we're all sharing this kind of consciousness and we're just gathering experience and maybe raising our vibration to be better people, as considered thousands of years ago, the church did the Crusades and killed a lot of people that didn't worship that same religion. But today we're much more accepting. So there is some kind of growth that I believe in. Let's say
sorry to just jump in, Kyle, because you've got some interesting points coming out, and I do want to go into it. But you're speaking a lot about religion, and we can talk about that if you wish. And we understand that religion or religious institutions they are man-made structures around the concepts of God or gods. But if a God exists, it wouldn't matter if there was a religion to worship it, it exists or does not. And what I really want to drill down into, and what I was really hoping for out of this conversation, if you're willing to go there, is to sort of define what you believe a God is, what it does. Does it have any impact on the world we're in now? Does it intercede? Can you communicate with it? Does it want to be found? Like, what are the parameters of your God, if you can potentially give us that?
Yeah, so far I've heard that there is a God. It's a he. He doesn't necessarily care about evilness or non-evilness. What is it, he?
Yeah, sorry. I guess I shouldn't specifically say he. I guess that's my Christianity background coming. So if it doesn't have like a shape or form, then it wouldn't have either sex, right? But that goes into the other topics. But as far as like something that is completely and utterly out of our reach, and we won't ever know if one actually exists till after we die, because we're limited by the material world and our ego. If we think of it as almost like maybe like a 11th dimensional creature that we would just have no concept of, and we might never will, I don't think he would have it wouldn't need necessarily anything to do with what we're doing, our actions taken on Earth, but maybe a broader picture. Maybe it wishes the best for us, but it's not necessarily the reason for all good, right? But it's through the experience that we need to learn.
Okay, so what are those experiences? I'm hearing you say that, all right, there's a God. We don't really know a whole lot about this God. It is somewhat unknowable, perhaps 11th dimensional, esoteric, sure. If we need to experience this God in order to understand this God, how do you know that this God exists? What are your experiences?
That's a good question. I I think we're getting to a point where we're more open to researching things we would deem supernatural or paranormal, and bringing more of the science aspect to it. So much more research going on about like reincarnation, in the studies.
You told me that you understand that we need to experience this God seemingly in a kind of direct way.
Oh, yeah.
Do I have that correct? That you believe that this God exists because you have had that direct experience on some level?
No, I was more going towards we need to experience things to grow. So even, I mean, arguably, there's lots of philosophers that are philosophers that talk about we need that experience, and we obviously suffer through life, but without suffering, we don't grow. We don't learn from our mistakes, and we just have this this growth potential. And if you don't suffer, then you don't grow. So people that are more well off are more likely to do things that we would deem, that would say they're narcissists or they don't care about people, but they don't have that growth, that suffering that we need in order to grow. I think that's a lot of the misconception that, you know, evil comes from it and that's why they're suffering. And I don't believe that.
Well, I have sort of like thoughts on suffering as a necessity for growth. I mean, we can grow because of our adversities, but I don't know whether it's absolutely necessary. Like I've grown,
or often useful, you know, as per the introduction today when we were talking about how physical pain, corporal punishment, even emotional abuse, they don't lead to the positive changes that we're maybe hoping for. But keep going, Jamie.
Yeah, I've personally grown significantly since I started hanging out with the ACA and doing this kind of stuff, and it's all been positive. Like all of it has been positive. And I've had negative things happen in my life, obviously, some of which were emotional, some physical. And while I have learned to cope with those, I'm not a fan of the phrase, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I believe that whatever doesn't kill you leaves scars you learn to live with. So I have to push back a little bit that on enlightenment through suffering. Sorry, any Buddhists in the audience. And I did also want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. It really pinged in my mind. You said we should investigate the supernatural with scientific method, or science should consider the supernatural. But as far as I'm aware, if it's supernatural, it's not part of the natural world. We can't really test it, measure it, or detect it. And as soon as we can test, measure, or detect something, it becomes part of the natural world. Like if we found some way to detect ghosts, for example, if ghosts were real, as soon as we're able to provide ample physical evidence of that and repeatable testing, it's not supernatural anymore. It's natural. What do you think?
Yeah. I recently had a discussion about this, and I thought it was really informing. I like listening to both sides. I like doing research on lots of different kind of religions, and I'm big fans of science and everything like that. And just as far as that, yeah, I do believe that there's not something like considered like supernatural. Everything is part of the natural world, even, you know, other dimensions and stuff like that. But I think of science as like it's like a veil, right? So everything in front of the veil, we're able to conduct tests on, we're able to see, we're able to do measurements, and we're able to make theories. Everything behind it, because we're limited by, like I said, the technology and the math part of it. When that eventually grows, we'll be able to understand more. So, you know, something that was a concept like black holes like 60 years ago, we're actually able to see those now. So there's a unlimited capacity for science to be able to discover new things, and what's considered now is, you know, abnormal or supernatural isn't actually so. But
let me just ask you one more thing, and then sorry to jump in again, and then I'll let Christy have his way with you. But would it then not be more sensible than, instead of putting labels like God or reincarnation or frequencies or any other stuff that can be interpreted in different ways and does not currently have any actual proof, just go, I don't know, we'll find out Maybe. And just go where the data takes you, where the evidence takes you. And don't draw conclusions or go looking for God or looking for ghosts. Just if they happen to become a feasible point with what we know, then you can start talking about it. I think, and again, I do not mean any disrespect, that considering these relatively unfounded concepts like gods as candidate explanations for phenomena that we observe is somewhat putting the cart before the horse. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle, when it
definitely.
comes to that question of what do you believe and why, I do feel like you're fairly soft on both points. That, you know, what you believe is this sort of vague notion of a God that seems to just kind of fill in all of the gaps of things that you don't already understand or that we as a society have not figured out scientifically. And the why that you believe it seems to, again, just be because it feels right on a certain level without necessarily the good evidence to back it up. Is that okay for me to say? Would you disagree with that?
I would say I've done a lot of exploring, and I think there's kind of a myriad that science and not necessarily religion, maybe spirituality is a better word for it. As far as why I believe it, it's more of overall curiosity and wanting to know more, like learning about the law of vibrations from over 6,000-year-old tablet. And then we have things like string theory or their theory about like molecules move in everyday objects, which was on the tablet that everything has its own vibration. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'm just fascinated by like things that it could teach us, maybe insights that we don't currently know, and following the science, because I can't wait for other new fantastic things to come out. Maybe there's not a God, maybe there is, but it's just there's so much we don't know in general.
I hear you. I mean, these things are fascinating and we don't know a lot about them. And when I say we, I, on a certain level, yes, do mean like all of us, the royal we. When I say we, I also kind of probably mean certainly myself, and I'm imagining Jamie to a certain extent, Kyle, you as well. These are not things that we thoroughly understand. We're not the physicists that we would need to be in order to really wrap our head around a lot of these concerns. But I can just say plainly that they don't seem at this stage to point to God. Like you said, we don't know. And I don't think that we're making a hard statement that there's absolutely no possibility of a God. Certainly, there are some people on this network that would say that. And I think that there's a reasonable argument. But there's nothing in string theory or any of these other ideas currently that points us towards a God. But I hear you kind of pointing in that direction. And I don't mean to be long-winded, but if you are looking to chase the science, I will just go ahead and say you happen to be talking to somebody who works to help people either heal from past suffering or to grow towards a healthier point of view, whether that growth is needed because of suffering or because we all just choose to grow as people. I can say that, yeah, suffering is an inevitable part of life, but the research really doesn't show us that it actually helps us to grow in positive ways. Healing from difficult experiences is that growth, but I don't know that this notion that we have to suffer in order to be good people is well-founded in research. I can point you towards specific studies that would indicate pretty clearly people who beat themselves up, people who make themselves suffer as a form of trying to train themselves into growing, really do miss the boat. There's plenty of good research that says that like angry Bobby Knight throwing chairs, screaming at players kind of mindset and mentality around growth and striving and effort doesn't actually have the effect that we want it to have. And instead, people who are well rated or who score highly on scales of self-compassion are also people who are more likely to be rated by their bosses, by their teammates, by their coworkers, by their kids, by their partners. as being people who are more easy to get along with, as people who are more productive, as people who have more success and achievement in a great number of fields of life. So forgive me for giving you that whole TED talk, but I'd encourage you to really reconsider that notion of suffering as a necessity, as something that's useful, and instead encourage you and everybody listening to treat themselves nicely as a way of empowering and nurturing themselves towards growth. I mean, you get more growth with water and fertilizer and sunlight than you do necessarily with like shears and, gumming in and really cutting things down.
Mm.
It's a lot for me to throw at you, Kyle. How's it landing? Okay. Yeah, suppose so. Let's go ahead and move on and take this moment to look at our super chats while we get our crew cam up and ready to go so we can thank all of these wonderful, hardworking people.
Righto, we have had a super chat in. But first, is that the crew that we see?
Yeah, there's our wonderful crew. Thank you, hardworking folks, for everything that you're doing. All of the note takers, the moderators, and everybody else there in the control room here in Austin. Yeah, Jamie, hit us with that super chat.
So we got $9.99 from Never Again. And they say, recently returned from a funeral for my uncle. And instead of celebrating his life, the vast majority of the service was trying to recruit/scare people into giving their lives to a god. # pissed me off. And so it should and would. Like, that's crappy. Like, don't do that. Hijacking someone's... I mean, I've heard stories about this, about funerals, weddings as well. Where it's like, no, we're not going to celebrate the people. We're going to give glory to God and make you come to us for the church and all. I'm like, just... Yeah, it does. I'm hashtag piss me off as well.
Sure. No, I mean, they say there are no atheists in foxholes, and at least part of it is because of all of these religious institutions and traditions that really prey on people who are in places of mourning and grief. And instead of offering them some amount of compassion and kindness around that pain, we live in a culture and a society that is structured in such a way as to tell you that you are a terrible, disgusting sinner. And the only way that you will ever find happiness or joy or to see your dead loved one again, which is a hell of a claim, is to accept their Lord and Savior as your God. It's messy, it's gross, but I do think it tees us up for another call.
Yep.
Jamie, yeah, you ready to talk to Philologic Genie here in the USA. Help me with that name and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, so it's just a little play on words of philosophy, logic, and phylogeny. So, I just tried to keep it light. Yeah, so I'm calling in because I'm an atheist and I watched your show and I saw the poll and it said, is there anything useful in the Bible? And I have no idea if my take is going to be any kind of original or not. But I would argue that, yes, there is useful stuff in the Bible, like Proverbs 21:20, in the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has. Proverbs 21:23, he who guards his mouth and his tongue keeps himself from calamity. There is what I would consider objectively useful stuff in the Bible. Problem is, there's also a bunch of other stuff you have to sift through. So even if the Bible does contain the useful stuff, that doesn't make it the best source for the lessons. And I'm wondering if you guys would agree with that or have any kind of opposition to that.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. The point that I would make when someone comes to me, and one of the reasons why we asked the question in the poll in the chat is, how do you tell what's good and bad in the Bible? What's that open to interpretation? I might think that some of the things you think are good advice in the Bible aren't good advice in the Bible, for example. Probably not, but we are different people. And secondly, if it's not entirely consistent, should we trust it at all? Should we find better options, like you said, or can we allow it with the caveats? not to get too dramatic, it's kind of like the old, like, oh, he may have been the dictator of X country, but at least he got the trains running on time. And I'm like, well, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a fantastic observation there. Yeah, I don't know. So to me, my takeaway is always just like, yeah, but does it matter because there's all the other stuff that's there too, and some people, you know, they might not parse through it to arrive at something that's even remotely compatible with what we would maybe consider the modern morality or you know, whatever that we use today. So that's cool. Christy, do you have any opinions on this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is just fair to say that, sure, there are a lot of words in the Bible, and some of those words do happen, in fact, to be true. And that is true about a lot of books. And so I would just say that you are allowed to throw the Bible out with the bathwater, because I don't really want to be spending too much time studying any book that is so constantly used to justify genocide and slavery and everything else. You know, if you find some sort of value in reading something like Mein Kampf, then I can appreciate wanting to understand these ideas. I'm also going to be very cautious about considering any of that as a source for my morality or as a way for me to operate in the world. I mean, frankly, just finding a somewhat newer book and considering it on rational grounds rather than this notion that every single word is perfect and inerrant, and if not perfectly inerrant, then at least somehow coming from a perfect God. How to square those things is another issue for another time, but it's really hard for me to take it seriously anytime somebody quotes a passage from the Bible as a source of morality, in the same way that it would really bother me to see some philosopher quoted when they happen to be right about something and terribly, terribly, disgustingly wrong about so much else.
Sure. I can agree with that. And then I would also just like to empathize with the funeral experience from that super chat. I was at a Lutheran funeral recently, and I remember distinctly feeling that exact same way, that they spent like 5 sentences on the family and the life of the deceased, and then a lot more time trying to talk about Jesus. And I was like, what is the purpose of this? This family paid for this. Why? But that's it. Thank you guys for the great conversation.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Yeah, have a great day.
Yeah, I was trying to skirt around that Godwin's law land woman, and you just jumped both feet on it, man. I admire your bravery.
Yeah, I'll take that on, sure. Well, before we take the next call, I would love to ask that everybody who is watching this live, that everybody who is experiencing this on whatever podcast app or on YouTube or wherever else, that you take a moment to click the join, the subscribe, to become a part of our community in that way. Become a channel member. Click the join button below the video and you'll get custom chat emotes, early access to clips and shorts, and you will help perpetuate the mission of Talk Heathen and the Atheist Community of Austin. You can send us a super chat with a question or a comment, and as you've seen, Jamie will read them on air today. Read as many as we possibly can, so please do like and subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, comment below on all of your favorite videos, and I suppose get ready for this next call from Sulis in the UK. Sulis, what do you believe is potentially useful about the Bible?
Well, I think it's the premier, hello, by the way. I think it's the premier source for shepherd-related symbolism, for one thing. It's not much, but it's definitely something I've noticed.
I thought you were going to say the premier source was shepherd's pie there for a second. But what comments do you have on it? I mean, do you feel that it does have anything useful in it, in seriousness, or what's your stance on it?
In seriousness, yeah, I think the major point has been covered, which is that you can certainly find some serious good life lessons in there. And I could find serious good life lessons in pretty much any book that I picked up.
So what is your, when you say good, they're good life lessons, you can find a good life lesson anywhere. How do you define a good lesson? Is it a, I knows it when I sees it kind of standard, or is there some way to filter the good from the bad so that we don't keep making these same ridiculous mistakes that have dogged our culture in many ways for the last 2,000 years?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that I knows it when I sees it is essentially still the current method for determining pornography. You know, that's famously where that quote comes from. I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. So that argument holds some weight that I couldn't really discuss the merits of. But I would
I don't mean to pile on, but I'll just say that I have discussed that standard on trying to gauge pornography on this channel and others on many occasions, and I find it preposterous. Like this idea that you will know it when you see it, maybe it works for one person and not another, but a lot of people seem to be finding quote unquote good life philosophies from absolute trash sources. I mean, just Google red pill and come back to me and let me know that that's a acceptable way to navigate the world.
Yeah, I would certainly say that the view has many critiques, and I'd be willing to hear any and all of them. Because if I'm relying on something that shouldn't be relied on, I'd much rather know.
Well, you might, to give you a bit of credit, maybe. Oh, sorry. I was supposed to give you a little credit. You may be, when you say I knows it when I sees it, you may be more instinctually applying something that could be a more formal framework. Like I can sit here and say I'm a secular humanist, therefore human flourishing is one of the primary measures by which I make judgments on ethics and morals. But I don't have to sit there and go, should I steal this sandwich? Well, let me consult my secular humanism brain. I just go, well, no, obviously it's going to upset someone whose sandwich that was. But on the other hand, if I'm starving, my human flourishing requires I have that sandwich, so I'm going to steal it. And that's all done sort of on an instinctual level. But I think it might behoove everyone, not just you, me, anyone listening, that if you're having to make moral judgments, do take a step back and go, why did I think that was a good thing? Why did I think that was a bad thing? Can I find patterns? Am I doing this? Am I maybe find a framework that sort of matches what you already kind of feel, and study it a little bit and go, yeah, that's kind of how I roll. I'm going to start using this a bit more deliberately in future.
What do I believe and why? I know it's simple. I know we say it all the time, but I think those are the two fundamental questions, not just of this program, but maybe of a well-examined life.
I would like to answer what you posited earlier, which is that beyond simply I knows it when I sees it, perhaps it's a case of basing it upon something. And I think if it's a bit of it's a bit of a house of cards, but the next approach that sprang to my mind when you said that is that anybody could recognize what they would call a good idea if it already conformed with their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So if it seemed like, it fit their model, then they would call that good advice, even if it wasn't advice that they would take because they theoretically had already taken it. And of course, that's a minefield as well. So I would love to ask, in that case, since I have you here, or since you have me here, since I'm lucky enough to be here, what is a good way to determine what a good lesson is?
Sure, that's a great question. Jamie, I'm curious where you'll take this, but I'll just jump in really quickly and say that to me, morality has to do with the well-being of conscious creatures. It's difficult to calculate. It's a science like anything else. And so it's going to require ongoing exploration and study. But morality is really just about beneficence and non-malfeasance. What are the ways in which we can make the world better? We can increase general well-being. So things like life expectancy, happiness, joy, decreasing negative outcomes, getting away from anxiety, depression, short life. I mean, whatever these kinds of things are, we are looking to increase the good, we're looking to decrease the bad, and there you have your moral framework.
Mm. And I'd get on board with that to the most part. I would always say, though, do so from an empathetic standpoint. And by that, I mean, don't just go, what's good for me? What do I want? What makes me happy? Try and think of the other parties in the situation and go, what are they wanting? What are they needing? What will make them happiest or best? Because often these situations aren't black and white. They aren't cut and dried. It is going to be a compromise as to what the actual best solution to a given moral or ethical conundrum is going to be. That's why we have things like the trolley problem and that kind of stuff to illustrate that dogma and axiomatic moral standards put down by an authority that you must follow tend to have worse outcomes. So I would say, if you want to know if something's good or bad, think about all the people who are going to be affected by it and who's going to be made happy, who's going to be made sad, who's going to be hurt, and minimize, like Christy was saying, minimize the bad, maximize the good, and be content that it isn't going to be perfect.
Right, because it is a science and therefore is always growing, always developing. But I appreciate you hitting that point. It's not just about beneficence towards ourselves. It's not just about non-malfeasance towards ourselves. It's towards others. It's towards society. It's towards really all conscious creatures. And we can get into what that actually means. And, notions of veganism and everything else can get really, really complex here. But at its core, our goal is to make the world better for more people and less awful for more people to the best of our ability.
Mm. What do you think?
Okay, well,
Sorry,
we will. Yeah, please go ahead.
I think really, I just want to say thank you for your time. I really do appreciate that. That's insightful. I'm going to think on that.
Yeah, well, glad to hear it. Thank you so much for giving us a call. And thank you, honestly, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, for being concerned with issues of morality, for being willing to learn and study and grow and to explore the science of morality and to work towards the, increasing well-being for yourself and those around you and decreasing distress for as many people as you can. Have a great day. Thank you for giving us a call.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah. Take care, man. Yeah, I'm big on empathy. I think one of the major problems that we have in the world today is that people are so inward looking and don't look outward. I just, people don't understand how much harm they're doing by the things they say and the acts they do. They just won't feel with other people or see them as other humans, as other people. And it's just like, come on, you've got to know that this isn't good because there's so many people hurting because of what you're saying and doing. Oh, well.
Oh, well, indeed. All right, Jamie, let's talk to a theist named Jimmy coming out of Texas who is curious about psychedelics and what they maybe can suggest about God. What's your question for us today, Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the studies at Johns Hopkins where they had atheist volunteers who signed up for what they call psychedelically induced mystical experience. And when they found that they undergone this experience, they were no longer able to identify as atheists. And so I was wondering, how interested are you in psychedelics? Would you ever travel to Brazil where these things are legal and test that for yourself?
Yes. So let me clarify a little bit about the research that you're citing, and then sort of my role in talking about all of this. I am a psychedelic integration therapist, and so I do often work with clients who have experienced psychedelics and are working to make sense of all of those things, including these mystical experiences and perhaps even brushes with God. I'm also a ketamine-assisted psychotherapist, which means I actually work with clients who are self-administering ketamine, a dissociative psychedelic, dissociative anesthetic, and experiencing those things with them by helping them to verbally process and then to integrate all of those things. So I'm a clinician who has gotten my hands dirty in this field and have talked to a number of people about these types of experiences and looked at a lot of the research. Johns Hopkins has been doing some really fascinating studies with psilocybin, and there are a number of case reports and other pieces of evidence about people reporting back saying they had mystical experiences that felt godlike in nature, that perhaps made them question the nature of reality. There is nothing that I am aware of where psychedelics are administered to proclaim atheists who come out on the other side of the Sneetch machine with a godlike star and are now convinced that there is a God. Certainly people have interesting experiences and they work to interpret those experiences. And when you are working with psychedelics, there is the possibility for pretty dramatic change and growth. But I had a personal client of mine who was in the process of getting ready to take ketamine as part of our professional clinical work together, who became kind of nervous and pulled out after reading Reddit forums and some of these things pointing to some sort of half understood, regurgitated research around how psychedelics make people see God. And as we talked about it, and as we actually looked at all of that research, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that that's not actually what the data really says. So I know I'm coming to this, Jimmy, with a different set of skills and experiences than you. So I hope I haven't been too long-winded. How is everything that I'm saying landing for you?
Well, when you say you're not familiar, there's a particular study, online survey study that they've done at Johns Hopkins, and they published in the Public Library of Science. And I don't know if you've looked at that one, but it does specifically say about refer to atheists who were converted by this experience.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is some non-zero number, and I have seen data to indicate that there is a non-zero number of people who self-described as atheists who had experiences under psychedelics, who then did revisit issues of spirituality and perhaps came to different conclusions. And that doesn't mean that psychedelics make you see God, or that people who experience psychedelics universally, commonly, or really on any sort of meaningful level of statistical significance walk out convinced that there is something anyway resembling the Abrahamic God, for instance, or really anything else that we generally think of as a God.
And I'd actually go a little bit further in saying that these kinds of studies and insights, along with some personal experiences that I've had, just push me in the complete opposite direction. It is a refutation of the existence of these supernatural entities, because if we can induce things that would have been seen as visions or prophecy or speaking to God with a simple chemical, and we can dial that in and we can watch it happen on an MRI machine, then what we're proving in my mind is that God's in the brain, and he's just mental processes. And when I say God's in the brain, I don't mean an actual God. I mean that the things that people believed are God or gods or spirits are literally just all in your head.
Well, the reason I would disagree with something like that is because, neuroscience, I think, doesn't necessarily establish that consciousness is something generated by the brain. Another thing I would note is that...
don't go on to another thing. I'm sorry. That one thing is enough for me to chew on all day. Say that part again? That consciousness is not generated by the brain?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything within neuroscience that definitively states that, consciousness is something necessarily generated by the brain.
I mean, I don't know about the word definitively, and I would say that any good science is always exploring deeper explorations. I would also maybe decenter the quote unquote brain. People miss out on the reality that their nervous system covers so much more than just our brain. And consciousness, as we understand it, really does come from every fiber of our being. It's an emergent property of all of these different complex systems interacting with each other in ways that are really chaotic and difficult for us to grasp and truly understand. But consciousness comes from inside the body to the extent that we are able to explore and understand such things.
And I would also add, if you think it's something else, let me just say this, if you think it's something else, then you're going to have to provide some kind of evidence, something compelling, something that we would be able to test. Because if you just say, yeah, well, it might be a god, like, well, you're going to have to prove it.
Could be a lot of things, right?
Yeah, could be aliens, could be a wizard. I don't know. But we have what we have in terms of data, and everything that we know points to it coming from within. As Christy said.
Well, I would agree with Christy in that it's a transactional relationship with the external and the internal. But another thing I wanted to add was that the studies at Johns Hopkins, they specifically use, I don't know what you use in your psychedelic assisted therapy or if you use microdoses, but in the studies at Johns Hopkins, they specifically use a single high dose, which is the equivalent of what Terence McKenna called the heroic dose. And
man, I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt you again, Jimmy. I'm sorry to be difficult, but the term heroic dose, these legendary doses, is almost always, if you are seeing that phrase, go ahead and find another study. Go ahead and find another research article or something else to look at. I don't mean to be curt or to throw out a major claim like that, but I can say pretty plainly that the research that came out of Johns Hopkins did not use the phrase heroic dose. Whoever you are reading that from did not adequately describe the actual scientific paper that was published.
Yeah, it sounds more Hunter Thompson than Johns Hopkins to me.
I actually got this from Dr. Roland Griffiths himself. He's the one that used that phrase. And, in describing the types of doses they're using, in other words, they're using a high enough dose to bombard what they call the default mode network. This is
all doses of psilocybin, for instance, are going to maybe not quote bombard, but are going to be impacting the default mode network and are going to create a system in our brain effectively where the things that we are used to thinking about are of less consequence, and less used brain systems are coming more online. So that's a little bit about how these compounds actually impact the brain. But this notion of a heroic dose, I'm not familiar with the researcher that you are citing here. I'd be more than happy to take a look at it if you want to email it to me, but I have some real questions about it.
Yeah, tv@atheist-community.org. Get that study in that email inbox and we will take a look at it.
Yeah, sincerely, I will.
Do you mind if I say one last thing?
Please.
Okay. Well, the term in psychology that I was referring to is ego death. They also call it non-dual consciousness, and that, it basically, the subject-object dichotomy that you have in your experience where, you feel like you're a bodily entity roaming in an environment, that is completely dissolved inside this phenomenon. And, that's why I always have issue with, people with, Matt Dillahunty, for instance, that talks about super strawberry. And, there's still an obvious subject-object dichotomy going on there. And so that's why I think, he's definitely, whatever he's talking about, he's definitely not talking about what Johns Hopkins calls a complete mystical experience. And
right.
I'll leave it at that.
A mystical experience. It's just an experience. It's not, you're making this leap to God or something supernatural when it's just an experience. I've had some very strange experiences in my time. In my dreams, didn't mean that they were real.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I hear you saying that psilocybin or perhaps some of these other psychedelics can help us to experience, quote, ego death and to help have an experience of non-dualism. But neuroscience says overwhelmingly that dualism, the dualistic brain model, does not make sense. We experience ourselves as being sort of maybe a disembodied voice, a soul. We experience ourselves as having consciousness as this kind of separate thing from our body. But we know from neuroscience, we know from a lot of personal experiences through meditation, through a lot of these things, that that is an illusion. The self is an illusion in a great number of ways, and scientific and even spiritual and faith traditions. This notion that psychedelics perhaps help us to understand that or help to reveal that to us on a felt level is a meaningful part of why psychedelic experiences can be so powerful in our healing and as our growth as humans, not because they are somehow allowing us to achieve like flipping a switch and becoming a different type of non-dualistic brain, but rather by helping to emphasize and reveal the reality that we are already always operating in that non-dualistic fashion. Your brain is a part of your body. Your brain is really a part of your nervous system. And all of these things are working together in various levels of congruence. And psychedelics have the ability to disrupt that congruence, to disrupt the normal operating patterns of these things. And that's an really incredibly remarkable and interesting thing. The brain, consciousness, the body, the nervous system, these are all very complex systems with a lot of moving pieces. And one of the best ways to understand a complex system is to take just one part of it and break it or change it, and then to see how the rest of these compensatory systems are affected. That helps us to better understand what this one piece that we turned off or broke or temporarily changed is doing as part of the larger system. So I do think that there is incredible value in psychedelic research into consciousness and what it can tell us about our brains and our bodies. I have seen firsthand and worked with a number of clients who have experienced psychedelics as a remarkable form of healing. And so where appropriate, when done correctly, when done through a medical model of sorts, there is a lot to be valued here. None of it gets me towards God.
I have one last question for you, Jamie and Christy, because I think it's kind of, Jamie mentioned the supernatural. I think it's kind of unfair to characterize it that way, because I don't even think the professionals are talking about something that is defying the laws of physics. That's, something impossible. It is what they call a biologically normal phenomenon in consciousness that they seem to be inducing. And, even in the studies, I don't know how...
You are saying that that's connecting to God, like a God, which is, by its definition, a supernatural entity. Like, this is you want us to accept that these drugs open people up to God and they can't be atheists anymore. But the implicit thing that's being said, at least from what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that therefore God exists. That these drugs are allowing people to access this being.
I know. I'm a theist nonetheless, but yet I don't agree with the supernatural aspect. I don't think God necessarily has to be supernatural in the sense of define the laws of physics, depending on your interpretation of God, of course. For instance, in the studies, they kind of interpret it through the lens of what they refer to as the perennial philosophy, where they see this phenomenon in consciousness happening throughout history, and each of the religions has given it different names. Like in Christianity, it's called the Holy Spirit. In Buddhism, it's called Nirvana.
Well, this takes us on to an entirely different topic that I would almost be interested in sort of going into. Is that, well, what do you define as a god then? If it's an entirely natural thing within the scope of physics, and therefore couldn't do the kind of stuff that we see written in these texts, the Bible, the Torah, Bhagavad Gita, these amazing feats and being responsible for the world and everything in it and this kind of thing. What is your God then, if not that?
Well, having been influenced from experiences like these, it seems to be glimpsed inside those states of consciousness is what I would refer to as maybe unbounded consciousness, a consciousness where there's no limitations between life and death or time and space. And, I think people throughout history have referred to
But you're just making it sound like that God's a state of mind then. I'm thoroughly confused about what you're trying to get to, because I will admit that these people have had these experiences. I have no reason to not doubt them under the influence of these powerful compounds, but bringing the word God into it when it's just like expanded consciousness or something like that. I have very little use for that God in terms of the overall picture. If a God's going to be a God to me, it's going to have to be external and more powerful than me and have an impact on the world rather than just a thing I saw in a dream.
Well, I mean, the interpretation I've had after coming down from having an experience like this, I ended up being a kind of panentheistic understanding of the divine, where, I mean, there still is these attributes where I see God as something that does sustain reality with, that's where the unlimited power comes into play. But it's not like a Superman or some kind of external entity that's going to, prevent all sin on prayer.
I just call that physics, man.
I think...
you call it God and I call it physics. It's just the understanding of the nature of the universe. And I don't have to give it the GOD. I just give it the PhD.
Yeah, well, I think then we just probably differ on our... Well, I guess that's my point, that when you have these type of experiences, that it transforms what you understand about the divine or God and the nature of the divine.
Having had those experiences myself, again, not to go into too much detail, but I've experienced these things myself. I saw some weird stuff. I had some very transcendental experiences. I did not gain a belief in God. I did not leave my atheism. And I think that co-opting terms like God and spirit and divine, I shy from that for reasons very serious, because there are people that use those terms and use those terms as justification for heinous, hideous political machinations. So I would rather people, if you think there's some higher thing, don't call it God. Don't please use a different term, because that word has more baggage than flipping Heathrow Terminal 5. Sorry, a little bit of a side rant there. I apologize, but I saw God. Was it God? No, well, no, I just had a transcendental experience. Great. Please don't call it God.
And there is great value in exploring these things. There is great value in working to have a felt sense within your own nervous system, not just book reading, but actually experiencing for yourself that non-dualistic framework, so that it isn't just somebody explaining it to you. Somebody trying to explain to you about, for instance, like the optic blind spot, does not teach it to you the same way as actually experiencing it for yourself. I'm not going to go into detail about that idea here, but let me invite anybody who is maybe struggling with some of what Jimmy is saying, and Jimmy, you yourself, to do some research on the optic blind spot, and it will shake your worldview in maybe not the exact same way that you were saying these study participants had their worldview shaken, Jimmy, but it will help you to walk around the world going, the way that I see is not the way that I think that I see. I think we intuitively, on some level, most of us sort of believe that our eyes are like two cameras, or maybe just one camera, I guess, that somehow converts the actual world into a video that we can see. And that system is actually incredibly complex and can be damaged and fucked with in a lot of ways. And understanding that really helps us to see the world as it is. And using words like God have a way of stopping us from being bothered to try and understand the world as it actually is.
No, I agree that it's hard to talk about these topics. And just as fervently as Jamie is against calling other things God, I kind of feel fervent in the different direction, where I think the external entity is probably the biggest straw man in history, so maybe we'll leave it at that. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Keep reading, and thank you for calling. You have a great Sunday.
Yeah, that felt like a pretty productive conversation. I think I know what you mean about the optic blind spot, and this isn't just a joke on my behalf, but it's like whenever your eyes move, you're technically blind for a fraction of a second. Is that the one?
It's really more the fact that there are places within our field of vision that we can't fully see, that our brain sort of fills in the gaps with in order to help maintain continuity in the videotape.
And because of flaws, and that's why I have an nystagmus, why my eyes wobble, because it's trying to compensate for that. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely, we'll look into it. But before we go into any more calls, may I hijack? Because we have had another super chat from Less Than Lucid, $5. Quick shout out for Aromantic Awareness Week. For those of us that experience little to no romantic love are valid. That is indeed valid. Everything's on a spectrum. Aero Ace is perfectly normal. Aero, but with sexuality, that's perfectly fine too. Everything's cool. And we also have our top 5 patrons.
Please.
One of my favorite parts of the show is to shout out these fine folks who literally, without their help, we would not be able to do what we do. And it is Dingleberry Jackson, still a fantastic name. Oops, all singularity, still a fantastic name. Devoa Valjean, still a name I hope that I am pronouncing correctly. Kalevi Helveti, again, hope I'm getting that right. And Left in the Leaves, thank you all very much. An honorable mention goes to David Cross, who will be cameoing as the President of the United States in the spy novel I Will Never Write. Anyway...
All right. Well, beautiful. Let's take another call while we've got some time on the clock and speak to Kareem in Missouri. Kareem, I think you've got maybe a somewhat dark worldview here. Tell us about it.
What's the word? Yeah. So, how y'all doing today? So basically, I just want to say that we're all psychologically and emotionally abused mammals, and we live on the rock, and we're all gonna die.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that there is certainly truth to that. I often employ a psychological field of study that we know as existential psychotherapy, where we recognize that every living creature on some level, at least every conscious creature, has to cope with the fact that they're going to die someday. And trying to understand that reality and trying to make sense of that reality is a ongoing crisis for every one of us, kind of at all times, always, whether we choose to live in denial and kind of push back against those ideas, whether we get stuck in rumination and kind of fall in to the existential void where we obsessively ruminate on death. There's also a middle path where you can find a lot of joy and gratitude for the fact that you are not currently dead. And as to your point about emotional abuse and suffering, I think it's also true that all creatures suffer, that suffering is a part of life, and that can make us feel really isolated. That can be, by definition, very painful. And it can also bring us together. It helps us to recognize that suffering is something that all living things do. It can help us to feel connected to other people who are also experiencing suffering. And it lets us know that we're alive. You know, the day that you stop experiencing pain is the day that you are dead. So if you're feeling pain right now, it doesn't mean that you are a bad person who deserves it. It doesn't mean that you are doing a bad job. It just means that life can be very hard. Hopefully that helps to graph onto some of what you're discussing, Kareem. What do you think?
Yes, sir. And I also believe that obviously the humans they're the only ones who know that we're gonna die, right?
I don't know that that's true. No. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that there are many other creatures on this planet that experience an awareness of their own death. Now, what their awareness is, how much we can anthropomorphize that. I might point you to a really fascinating book that our friend Kara Griffin turned me on to called "Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?" It's a great piece of work by a Dutch ethologist that might help to disagree with the points that you're making there. But why does it matter that humans are the only creatures that know that that they're going to die, if that is in any way the case, which I don't believe it to be?
Because I mean, even though that we're classified as mammals, I don't believe that we are animals. That's the way.
Okay, sure. So what you believe is that humans are not part of the animal kingdom. Why?
Yeah, to crib from Forest of Alki, we are too squishy to be plants, and we move too much to be fungus. So we are probably animals.
That fits for me. Yeah.
I don't know.
Kareem, why do you disagree?
That's why. Well, I believe, humans. I mean, unless you classify yourself as an animal, we all human. We all son of Adam.
Sure. I mean, I am a human. I am not especially well versed in biology, but I do understand myself to be a member of the species Homo sapien. I do believe that puts us in the great apes family of animals inside the animal kingdom. Like,
that's you.
Okay.
Yourself.
Right. So you've said it a couple times now, and I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, Kareem, but you've said you're not an animal. I'm not an animal. We're all humans. That's a separate category.
Right.
How do you know that?
Well,
why do you believe that? What is your reason for believing that? And don't tell me it's because we're the only creatures that know that we're going to die.
It's also because we can read and write, but that's not the only thing. The fact of the matter is we have a separate category.
Humans 100,000 years ago didn't know how to read or write, as far as we know, broadly speaking, depending on how we define those terms. Caveat. But
all babies and toddlers aren't human until you speak your first words and read your first. You're not a human until you can read.
That's what. I think you underestimate human beings.
I don't underestimate infants. I think they have remarkable potential and incredible beauty. And I think it is just miraculous that they get to be here, right? That somehow a sperm and an ovum in the right environment with the right materials is able to develop into a human being. And that sperm and ovum came from other human beings that came from other creatures that go back and back and back. I mean, this is all amazing. I don't underestimate it. I just categorize animals, I think, maybe differently than you do, because I think animals are remarkable. All of my best friends are animals.
Yeah. And the term animal and taxonomy, let me just get in on this. Taxonomy in general are arbitrary boxes that we've put things in. They are descriptive, not prescriptive. And the description that we have given to animals, to the animal set, to mammals, to great apes, fits us on a scientific level. And all biologists of worth their salt would say that. You know, laugh all you like. But here's my problem with this attitude of we are higher beings, we are more advanced, better, special, etc. It keys into that empathy. If we're so gosh dang special, why should we care about anything else unless it suits our whims? And I think a lot of the specialness of humans that's ingrained into a lot of especially religious teachings has meant that we are masters of this earth, we command them, go forth and multiply, these animals are yours. And so we basically just take what we want, no thought for the actual ecosystem, no thought for the actual animal kingdom. And I think that if we started accepting that we are just an animal, a smart animal, an animal that has a lot of tools at our disposal and that kind of thing. But when we start accepting that we are animals and therefore we are not on this planet, we are part of this planet, part of this ecosystem, maybe, just maybe, we'll actually survive the next 100 years without dying of global warming or of a lack of stuff that we need, or overpopulation or underfeeding, or any of the myriad problems that we have because people are so gosh darn selfish. We are animals and we should start acting like it by living within our environment.
You know what I mean?
What?
No, we do not. We sincerely do not know what you mean.
We're not going to debate. I'm saying I don't want to debate you on the difference. Honestly, you could tell the difference between human and animal. I don't have to say
Okay, then what is it that you believe and why, Kareem? You called the show
I believe.
Why? What is
I
it that you're
believe
here to
God
debate? What is it that you are here to tell us? What is it that you believe?
I'm not.
Why do you believe it? That is your two-part question, and I'm going to throw 60 seconds up on the clock here in just a moment. I'm going to not interrupt you. You called in this show, so get ready. You got 60 seconds. What is it that you do believe, and why do you believe it?
I don't need 60 seconds. I was having a conversation. I don't know the time frame of when I could talk about. Basically,
Go ahead and start.
God is there to benefit you, right? So God is there to benefit you. He's not there to harm you. And anyone who suggests otherwise is just not there. They don't want the benefit for you. They don't want your benefit.
I think he maybe should have used the full minute. Jamie, did you get anything to respond to out of that? Was there information there?
I heard they want the benefit, they don't want the good, they don't want the I don't know, literally don't know what you're talking about, mate.
I believe that God is there to benefit you. He's not there to harm you. So anyone.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
That's a thing that you believe. That's half of my question. Thank you so much. You believe that there is a God and he's here to benefit me. Why do you think that?
Okay, let me ask you this. Do you believe that God is not there to benefit you? Honestly.
Well, depending on what you're talking about, God, many gods that I've heard of are going to damn me to eternal torture for not believing in them. So no, they're not benefiting me. How about your God?
I believe in one God, so I'm pretty sure I believe that we all have belief in the same God. You know, it's been like that since the beginning of time.
I don't believe in your God, Kareem.
No,
you believe in a God. Why do you believe in this God? Why do you believe in this God? Please let the next words out of your mouth not be a question, not be a meandering, not be a comment on the question itself. Please let the next words out of your mouth be, I believe that there is a God because...
I came from something, you know. I didn't come from nothing.
Okay. Yep. Nope. You didn't come from nothing. No, you came from your parents. In short, your biological parents are where you came from, and they came from their biological parents. And it's a slow evolution of turtles all the way down.
I said we can at least acknowledge, logically speaking, that we didn't come from nothing, though, right?
Well,
yes.
Defining nothing.
How we define nothing.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you what happened before the Planck time. Woe is me. But like, we're pretty sure of most of what happened since then. So, you know.
I don't know everything that happened in all of eternity always. I have some very, very, very vague notions about quote unquote the beginning of time. And I have a much more thorough understanding of, say, the last 100 years. But none of that gets me to God.
Use your logic, though. You can still use your reasoning, your logic. You understand?
That's why I don't believe in God.
Sure can. That's what we've been asking you to do for a few minutes here. You know, I'll give you a kind of a last chance to make your point, Kareem. What is it? There are perhaps thousands of people listening to you as you speak. What would you like them to know about what you believe and why? What are your parting words to try and make this world a better place today?
Don't let people think for you. Think for yourself.
Please, by all means, let that be true. So say we all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kareem, for your time and for your thoughts. Keep searching and give us a call back if you've got more to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the whole God's there for my benefit. I really do have to say, like, which God, and
yeah.
there's a good number out there that they've got a bullseye pointed on my forehead, and there's plenty of space for one, if they are real. And we can get into things like Pascal's wager and all this kind of thing, which God is real. I don't know. Seems like attitudes to me.
Sure. No, that's all fair. But, you know, before we go ahead and step out for the day, we've got a voicemail that came into the ACA that I'd like to spend a little bit of time with if we can. Let's see if somebody who had the opportunity to organize and call in with their thoughts was able to say something a little bit more coherent, a little bit more useful than some of the people we've spoken to today. Let's get that voicemail going.
Father God, anybody that hears my voice, please show them mercy, grace, and counsel, and watch after their souls, build a hedge of protection around them and fill it with the blood of the Lamb. Sever any unclean soul ties in them, any generational curses, any ancestral curses, and any Babylonian curses. Both bloodlines, as many generations back to Adam and Eve, give them eyes to see and ears to hear, Lord, and bind the spirits of confusion, fear, sorcery, pharmakeia, unforgiveness, unfaithfulness, pride, depression, suicide, rejection, poverty, addiction, lust, sex without marriage, and anything else exalting itself against you, Father God, in them. Bind it up, spoil all their goods, and loose them into the pit until judgment. Bind the strong man in them, divide its legion, and spoil all their goods, and cast them into the pit until judgment. Cast down and crush any spirits of Jezebel and Leviathan. Bind them up, spoil all their goods, and loose them into the pit. Lead them into a personal relationship with you, Lord Jesus of Nazareth. Lead them into repentance for remission of sin. Wash them in your holy blood, and bless them, and cleanse them, and heal them, and baptize them in the Holy Spirit, Lord. Give them eyes to see and ears to hear. In Jesus' name, amen.
And then he whispered, "No."
Yeah, fair. Oh man, that really does make me cringe because I recognize so many of those pat phrases and so many of that particular language and a lot of those ideas as things that kind of came out of my mouth at one point or another. I do have to ask, why is somebody calling us to not even say hi, hello, here are my thoughts and concerns for you, but just this prayer that theoretically God could already hear as it was forming in your heart, already knew that it was coming, but that you offered up to your Lord and Savior? Why did that need to be recorded in our voicemail box?
Yeah, I don't know. People, the whole thing of prayer and exaltation kind of I'm puzzled by it all, because if I were an omniscient, omnipotent God, I wouldn't need prayers. I'd say, yeah, I know, I already know. Shut up. Stop it. Though some of those exaltations I would like eyes to see. That'd be fan-fucking-tastic. I don't think that's what he meant. And there are certain people in the audience who may be able to more easily steer away from things like lust and relationships. For example, we have another super chain just slipping in
just
before
under
the
the wire.
Yep, Miranda Rensberger, a very loyal supporter and has been a member for 1 month. Just saying, darn, I should have got my super chat in sooner. I was planning on saying the same as Less Than Lucid. Happy Aero Week. Yep. All
Happy
you
to say it
aeromantics
again.
Yep. You are valid, all of you.
Yeah, you are valid. You are not trying to trick anybody into relationship. You are not unworthy of love or affection or companionship, however you define it, whatever it is that you are looking for. And I do hope that everybody listening will take a moment this week to just notice the ace and arrow folks in their life, or to recognize that if you don't know any arrow ace folks in your life, you probably do, without knowing it, and just being aware that these people are a valid and valuable part of our society is absolutely worth taking a moment to highlight.
Yeah.
So thank you for those super chats. Thank you for those ideas. Thank you for all of your calls and your questions this week. I guess I'll remind everybody that the prompt for this week is what's really going on in purgatory. We'd love to ask you to reply in the comments. Tune in at the beginning of next week's episode to hear the top 3 answers. Jamie, before we start sending out love rings, before we walk out the door for the afternoon, anything else that you want to put out into the world today?
Well, perhaps for the next time, if there's any Bible literalists out there that want to talk to us, Book of Revelation, D's nuts, ha, got 'em.
All right. Well, if anybody disagrees with anything that we have discussed today, or feels like they have something valuable to add to the conversation, whether that is personal experience or documented scientific research or whatever else that you think might call into question any of the information that we have shared today, let us know. hit us up, shoot us an email, tv@atheist-community.org. Sincerely, we do respond to each of those. And if there is anything about mine or Jamie's comments today, I'd love to read them. I'd love to respond to keep this conversation going. To that end, if you are watching this live on February 18th, we are just about to go into a Discord after show in the Atheist Community of Discord. That's at tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And as we start to charge up and get those love rings ready to go out into the world, we just want to say that if you don't believe, this is your community. We appreciate you being here. And if you do believe, we don't hate you.
We're just
not convinced.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live, Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.